Hello, good evening. Welcome to the David Ellis Report. This evening we will be asking if the UK is being driven into conflict with Russia and China, and who is driving that agenda. In the last several weeks, we have seen publication of two major reports, both released within days of each other. The first was the Huawei report, entitled China's Elite Capture. The 86-page report details an alleged campaign by Beijing to persuade influential individuals in the UK to back Huawei and its strategic aims. The dossier describes the Chinese telecoms firm as Beijing's strategic asset and is being used to establish a Chinese presence in essential national infrastructure, such as nuclear power and telecommunications. It claims that the Chinese want to use Huawei in the UK's next generation 5G network and help expand into other European markets, and undermine the Five Eyes intelligence alliance with the United States, Australia, New Zealand and Canada. It says politicians and academics and other elites in the UK have been targeted by China in an attempt to secure Chinese policies around the world, weakening the transatlantic alliance. The second report, entitled Russia, was the long-awaited report on so-called Russian interference in UK elections, including the Brexit referendum. It claims that Russia has been using social media platforms to drive public opinion on the UK relationship with the EU, making use of bots, trolls, as well as cyber attacks, such as orchestrated phishing attempts against government departments. The Russia report was produced by the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament, who took evidence from a number of experts, much of which was heard in secret. But a key expert was former SIS officer Christopher Steele, who by coincidence authored the Huawei report. Christopher Steele's boss during his time at MI6 was Sir Richard Dearlove, who in the days immediately prior to the release of the Huawei report gave two unprecedented interviews to Sky News, alleging that China had engineered the coronavirus in its Wuhan biolab. So the former SIS colleagues have exposed themselves as being extremely active in driving the pretext for future conflict with Russia and China. The question we have to ask is, can these interventions by Steele and Dearlove be relied upon? Or are they equivalent to Dearlove's pièce de résistance, the intelligence dossier that brought the UK into the Iraq War? To answer these questions, we need to look at the United States and the third report, the so-called Trump dossier, which was not only written by Christopher Steele, but was taken by Steele to Dearlove for feedback before being sent to the FBI. So this evening we'll be joined by Bill Binney, former Technical Director of the NSA, who retired just at the point of the bulk data gathering that the NSA was undertaking. So Bill, good evening and welcome. Thanks for coming on. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me, and good evening to you too.
So can I start with just where you were at that point back in the 2000 period, roughly where this bulk data gathering began, and if you take us on a little bit of a journey of how you then ended up from there to looking at this alleged Trump hacking of the emails.
Okay, well, what it started out as, we were developing a program to be able to manage the massive amounts of data passing around the world and select out only things that were relevant for analysts to look at, criminal activity and government potential threats and things like that. So we had a program and a process to make that happen, where we only pulled out relevant data on groups of people, or individuals. We look at leaders of states and things like that, but that was as far as the individuals went. And then in September, well, actually the decision started before that, because the CEO of Quest Corporation was approached, and this is in court records here in the United States. He was approached in February of 2001, 7 months before 9/11, to turn over all the bulk data on his customers. That means all U.S. citizens. Well, they may have been some foreigners in it, but that bulk were U.S. citizens, and they were asking him to turn over all his data on all those people in violation of the Constitution, and he refused unless they got a warrant, and so they didn't get a warrant. They couldn't. No judge would sign it at that time.
Yeah.
And so they went around and they found something. They went into data and fabricated data against him to put him in jail for 5 years.
Wow.
So that sent the signal to the rest of the CEOs of all the telecommunications companies: either you cooperate with us or we'll get to find a way to put you in jail. And so from there on, and then later, starting in October of 2001, 8 months later, they started after 9/11. They used that as the leverage to say, let's start collecting everything on everybody. And the first people they started to do that on were people, all U.S. citizens inside the country. And the Fairview program shows about 80 tap points inside the United States where they're capturing all the material on the fiber optic lines. And they're storing it in Utah and various other, San Antonio, Fort Meade here in Maryland, and so on. So, and from there, it just got worse. I kept opposing that. First, initially, I and about 4 other people, one who's still working for NSA, and 3 other people, Kirk Wiebe, Ed Loomis, and Diane Rourke from the House Intelligence Committee, we started opposing that internally in the government, going to the proper channels: the House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Inspector Generals of the Department of Defense, Department of Justice, and so on. Those were the proper channels. That's what we did. And then they sent the FBI after us because they used the pretext of the New York Times release of the warrantless wiretap program back in December of 2005 to use that to go after us. But they knew right then that we were not the people who did that, because they had all our records, all of our phone calls, emails, everything. So they knew that, okay?
Yeah,
But they still did that.
They still did it.
And of course, that was a declaration of war to me, and I'm not done with the war yet, so I'm still fighting it.
Wow.
At any rate,
Okay.
This all kept up. That kept going. I kept fighting this, and then Trump came in, and he looked like the brightest hope to end this bulk acquisition and spying. I did testify to the House of Lords about this too,
Right.
in the UK, right? And they said I was too far out of it. I didn't know what I was talking about. Well, now they know that everything I told them was true, and they just didn't understand it. They weren't smart enough to understand what I was saying.
Is that really the feedback they gave you at committee?
Yeah, they said I was 15 years out of date. What did I know? I only invented everything they were using, just about.
Wow.
And it was all the stuff that was compromised in the Snowden material, and they still didn't change the names of the programs some of them anyway.
Wow.
The rest of them, I knew saw the entire organization. That's what I left them back in 2001.
So at that period in 2001, was there anybody vocal in government that was driving to go this direction with bulk data on literally everybody globally? So forget going for groups or problems or individuals or terrorist or known terrorist organizations where you previously sort of specifically looked at. So we'd gone from actual targeting those are the problem people to everyone. Who was driving that?
Yeah, that was done by decided on by Bush, Cheney, Hayden, and Tenet. Bush and Cheney, of course, president and vice president, and it was done in a Cheney managed it. Inside NSA, it was called a Cheney blood oath.
Right.
The old westerns where
Yeah. So I mean, my understanding here that the Reagan administration, and I would love your opinion on this now, that the Reagan administration was a good administration. Would you agree with that?
Except for the Iran-Contra deal and the smuggling of dope inside the United States and selling it by the CIA, and I think George H.W. Bush was involved with that because he was a former head of CIA, and they used that dope smuggling program to sell the dope on the streets of the U.S. to get money to buy guns for the Contra, because Congress wouldn't give them money to do that. Yeah, except for that, they did pretty good.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly where I was with all of that as well. But we see the people coming through that you're talking about at that period, coming through then to the millennium. Now I just want to bring this in now before I forget that in one of the sort of areas of research that I got involved with, I ended up coming across this guy called Gordon Welshman. He was one of the main Enigma code breakers at Bletchley Park. And he wrote this amazing book, The Hut 6 Story. And if you get the original version, there's an expunged version. So the original version goes into his work at MITRE Corporation and the American Air Force, American government, all the secret side of stuff, where he's fabricating the initial sort of prototype systems that then are, at the top end of the spectrum, that then many years later filter out into the civilian population. But the point that Gordon made, and it's quite ironic, his story is very similar to yours, Bill, is that at the point he wrote the book and raised concerns about national security, and that there really wasn't any, and there were glaring problems with it. And he made some amazing comments here saying that the focus had gone from, and it's the same as your story, the focus had gone, and this is in 1982 when he wrote the book, gone from specific groups of problematic areas and problematic people that were up to no good to everyone. And he objected to that. And the second they found out he was writing this book, his security clearance was revoked and he was summarily drummed out. And this is effectively the guy that changed the course of World War II. He's not mentioned in any of the stuff to do with Alan Turing. Alan Turing seems to get all of the limelight. Gordon isn't spoken about at all. He's one of these individuals that they'd rather not speak about in case you read the book and find out what was going on.
I'm aware of his case, by the way.
You are?
Yeah.
When did you start, Bill, when did you start at the NSA? What period were you in at? What did you come in at?
I started there with the Army, I started in 1966, January.
Right, okay. Yeah, so you've gone all the way through. Yeah. So from height of the Cold War all the way up to the Reagan Bush. Yeah, okay, right. Extraordinary. At this point, obviously, you've got heavily involved with this attempt to smear Trump and the Trump campaign by painting him with the Russia hack allegations. And you've sort of identified that there are issues there with what those allegations are. Do you just want to go into that briefly?
Well, yeah, they were alleging that somehow he was involved with the transfer of DNC material to the WikiLeaks to publish to smear the Democratic campaign so he could win the election in 2016. And they were accusing him of being involved with the Russians. I knew that to be false from the very beginning, just by the way, the wording that the intelligence community used to say it, because it said they had no substance whatsoever. They had high confidence, Well, even by their own definition, high confidence didn't mean that they had absolute proof that what they were saying was true.
Yeah, it's woolly.
That was the way they put it in their own report.
Yeah,
so,
it's woolly and wobbly.
In the report, they denied it, so it contradicted it, Yeah,
I mean, I think they kind of go, but there seems to be a repeat pattern with this Russian angle, this Russian sort of so in Britain we've had sort of several attempts at this, and this is why we're sort of bringing it to you sort of stateside with the Trump dossier, because there's some overriding factors. So we've got a Huawei report here that's talking about infrastructure and the Five Eyes, so I'm going to come back to that. And they're saying that there are security problems with that. Well, we've got some people here that are saying, well, Huawei was in there in 2007, so what's the problem now? What's changed? That's not a consistent argument. We've then got the Russia report here where they're alleging interference again with an election here in Britain, and particularly with the Brexit period where we're supposed to be leaving the EU and starting anew. And we've got the same thread there of allegations around voter mining and voter manipulation. And I think that comes back to this sort of shape and prism stuff that you're technically adept with. And then we come to the Trump dossier. But one of the overriding factors here is this guy Steele.
Yeah.
Steele keeps popping up. No, we've got, I don't know, what do we say? Is it like third time lucky or something? We keep trying to...
MI6 agent trying to subvert the entire process of both our governments.
well, I mean, it's like, they keep coming back with the same kind of, it's like it's third time lucky. And I think, well, I don't think the general public are buying it. They're going, well, there's something not right here, the grand jury in effect. But
Yeah.
I want to just go from the Steele, there's this Christopher Steele factor to Richard Dearlove, former head of MI6, so C here in Britain. Now, he was, I'm told, Steele consulted him on this Russian dossier before it was, on the Trump dossier before it was presented there in America for evidence in effect. Now, he's a really interesting guy here in Britain, because when we come back to this bulk data gathering and the intelligence and the security and how that's working with Five Eyes. So I just want to go into that in a little bit of detail if we could, because Dearlove is saying in a group here in Britain which were very active in Brexit called Veterans for Britain, and they've got a professor there called William Prince, and they've said that there are real issues with this new European Defence Union and how that will affect the Five Eyes relationship with going into this treaty. So what I'm wondering, Bill, with your technical expertise here, is how does the Five Eyes work technically with the bulk data there at the NSA? Sort of how does that, if you could just sort of go into that in...
Sure. Yeah. Okay, well, there are, let's see, for the English-speaking countries, the Five Eyes, that group started in World War II, and it got stronger over the decades, and the cooperation got to be greater and greater over time. And that was kind of the exclusive intelligence club in the world. And the BND wanted to break into that. They thought that would be a great thing to be a member of the Five Eyes, make it the Six Eyes,
Yep.
So, but it includes, of course, Canada, UK, New Zealand, Australia, and the US. And they share virtually everything. And there's a program called IC Reach.
Yep.
If you look at go on and Google IC Reach and NSA program IC Reach, you'll get a diagram that'll show you the connections between all the Five Eyes and the NSA going into the NSA database. What it means very simply is NSA has all the money, so they build all the storage. Now the Five Eyes do a lot of the collection also in Bude in the UK. But I think the NSA gave them $250 million to build that facility, something like that. And so they feed the information, everything they collect there and everything they collect on other places, into NSA to do the storage of the data. That's being stored in Utah and in that facility there, the 1 million square foot storage facility.
Yep.
And then also there's a 600,000 foot storage facility down in San Antonio. And I don't know how much they have at Fort Meade. And the entire basement under all the buildings and they have a supercomputer building. There's lots of storage there too. So in other words, NSA can afford to buy all the storage. So they've become the storage facility, long-term storage facility for all the Five Eyes. Now, the other countries like UK, they have a certain amount of storage. They can keep data there, for a certain period of time. But after that, they forwarded it to NSA for long-term storage, and they can access it and retroactively analyze it through this IC Reach program. So that's how they get into the stored data in NSA. If you go see, you'll see those connections in that. And that was compromised by or exposed by Edward Snowden. Now, I would point out that foreign access to data on U.S. citizens and stored by NSA is illegal. Okay, it's unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional for NSA to store that data.
Yep.
Okay, so, and we have by the way, just to let you know, we have L.A. Chukart and I have a petition into the Supreme Court arguing against this bulk acquisition as a violation of the constitutional rights of every U.S. citizen. And that's to be heard. They're going to be doing a review of all the cases before the Supreme Court starting 29th of September. And then they'll determine from that list what cases they will hear in the following year. So hopefully we can get through that process. And the government has not opposed our petition at all. So they basically have given up. They aren't going to say anything. The reason they're not going to say anything, because if they did, they'd have to address the charges we were making with the slides from Snowden that I included as exhibits in my affidavit.
Right.
And that included all the tap points in the US. I know where they all are, by the way. I
Right.
went on Google, did a Google search, and I found every tap point inside the US and around the world for AT&T and Verizon. Had a little more difficulty with British Telecom and Deutsche Telekom, but I got some of them anyway. And I had to use a very simple principle. This is cute. You'll like this. First of all, if you have a center doing a lot of electronic, business with computers and servers and all that, that generates a lot of heat. What that means is you have to disperse that heat. You have to have cooling units on the roof of your building, large ones, to get rid of the heat.
Yep.
So I went looking for, and I found on the web, I found a diagram of the Ma Bell microwave network inside the United States from 1960. And if I took that and I overlaid that on the Fairview program, all the major intersecting points fit right over those tap points on the Fairview.
Okay.
And so that was my cluster matching. And I say, hey, okay, now I know all the cities where these tap points are. So I went to the cities and I said, where is a Ma Bell AT&T building? And I looked at a building, and I had two criteria. One, I had to have large cooling units on the roof to get rid of the heat.
Yep.
And two, it had to be next to a railroad. Why next to a railroad? Well, the shortest distance between any two major cities is along the railroad.
Yep.
So these cables, these big, fiber optic cables are expensive. So the shorter distance, less cost.
Yep.
And you don't have to tear up roads. You don't have to tear up sidewalks, and then replace them. And you've got free right of way almost the entire distance.
Yeah. So
it's cheaper.
It's safer, cheaper, and it's more stable.
Yeah. So I found them all. And I put them all in my affidavit saying I'm prepared to testify to all of this to the Supreme Court. So far, they won't let me testify anywhere. I put it also in the General Flynn case and the Roger Stone case, affidavits saying the same thing about Russiagate, and they wouldn't let me testify.
So they wouldn't even allow that in. I mean, have you got political support for what you're doing and saying there?
See, the only person to support me was the president. He told Secretary Pompeo when he was head of the CIA, director of CIA, to talk to me if he wanted to know facts about Russiagate. Okay. Now stop and think about that. Here I am, one little person with a laptop on my desk, and I can find out this kind of information along with supports from other guys. We had like a little over half a dozen people involved in this, 2 in the UK, and the rest over here, about 4 over here. And so we were the ones who were looking at this and came up with this, with our laptops and what was exposed in the web and on the web that we could investigate. And yet here we are spending over $100 billion a year on the intelligence community in the United States, and they can't come up with this.
No, they
so
don't
what's
want
wrong
it.
with our intelligence community?
There's a different perspective, isn't there? And I think that this,
the
view, there's such a step change between specifically going after people that are up to no good to just analyze, just going after everyone, because well, there's you've got the capacity there for retrospective prosecution, haven't you, or retrospective pursuit? But I was aware of that. I was aware of that Utah facility quite some years ago. And it was a conversation when I was lobbying in and out of Parliament against UK defence cuts that people just didn't want to hear about. Politicians didn't want to hear about it. There was a few people technically that I knew that wanted to talk, because my interest was, okay, they've got that, but how are they processing it? Right. I mean, I've got a kind of really. My problem with this is what is this objection that they've got? I see that there's 2 overlapping factors. You might see it slightly differently, but there's a clear objection to Mr. Trump. They don't want Mr. Trump in office, and they certainly don't want him re-elected.
Yeah.
So there's issue number. That's a consistent factor all the way through this, and it may well be that he wants to uphold the Constitution, which is clearly getting in their way.
Yes.
And then we've got this factor our side of the Atlantic, where we've got this up-and-coming European Defence Union that wants to take control of all defence and security services in the EU zone, and currently as it stands, Bill, that includes the United Kingdom. So they want to take single point command and control of all of it. So that's not just the military, but the intelligence side of it as well, into a single point arrangement. And the argument that Dearlove is postulating is that somehow that's going to interfere with the Five Eyes security arrangements. Now, I'm just going to ask you this, because I mean you're the expert on this, is that currently through that IC Reach arrangement into the NSA information there, if there's a step change here in Britain where the way that the security and intelligence is managed, i.e. we go to a European model, what does that mean then with then making approaches to the United States into the NSA for this information?
Well, you see, that could cause some access denial into the main databases in the NSA. But again, that could be handled by negotiations with the however they set up the organization, the EU. They can also do that because they have I didn't finish. The Five Eyes are not the only ones feeding data into that base. There are like 9 other countries involved: Japan, Germany, Denmark. I mean, you just recently heard about the Danish taking action against some of their intelligence agency leaders. They got rid of them because of
Right.
they found out, surprise, surprise. This is what I told the UK House of Lords. But they said I was too far out of date. I didn't know what I was talking about. This is just crazy. Right? Everything I said was true, and everything has been proven true over the time. And those people just weren't open to anything they didn't want to hear. As Jack Nicholson said in his one, and I can't remember what the name of the movie was, but he said, "You can't handle the truth," and that's basically what that House of Lords group couldn't handle the truth. That's all.
It's looking I think just as a supplemental, I'd love to come back to you on what you actually gave there to the House of Lords, whether we can get a record of it in some fashion. But just carry on.
It was also the Wired magazine wrote it up afterward, and I listed everything I gave to the House of Lords, and they published that in one of their magazines. I have that somewhere. I can look that up somewhere, and if I find it, I can send it to you. Okay.
Yeah, I'd love a copy of that. Let's just go back to that access denial area there. Yeah. I see politically some forthcoming issues. I'm just going to sort of draw it back to Mr. Trump. Where clearly there are, there's a very strong group that are opposed to him, and there's a very strong public support for Mr. Trump.
Yes.
So he's already said before he was a candidate, before he announced his presidential candidate, that NATO was dead. And that's when I started to pay attention to what Mr. Trump was doing. And obviously subsequently he's become elected, and he's made comments appertaining to Germany's payments into NATO being completely unsatisfactory. And I think he's even taken steps to withdraw American troops from Germany because on the basis, and that's his political argument, that they're just not paying his way and they're freeloading in effect.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
I've got to sort of draw it back because obviously the concept of an American national force, you've got a national military under national control. Britain currently is teetering on really not having a national military because it's so small and weak. But obviously we've got this NATO factor, and then we've got this European defence union that's not just about military. It wants the intelligence and security and the defence industry all to come into an all-in concept under single point command and control. So it wants the military, the intelligence, and the industry. So Trump is obviously sort of looking at this arrangement, and I see several issues there. One, I see this access denial because he could politically use that. I'm not happy with what you're doing. You don't get your data. Okay? And I'm then seeing other two big issues coming up, that there is the defence contractors, because if Europe just wants one single defence contractor, what does that mean for American defence manufacturing?
Well, I assume that would take a portion of the market away from them. That certainly would be an effect, and certainly the cooperation of building these things, because these companies cooperate in building things, especially from the UK companies here. I think more so UK than any others, but But certainly that could affect those relationships.
It could, and of course we've got one big area here. The nuclear warheads that Britain uses in its Trident nuclear deterrent, the IP is American. Although
Yeah.
the submarines in the system and the Royal Navy operate them, the IP is American. You know, I see a really big issue there with that one. But just in terms of,
I do
I mean,
not, well, by the way, I don't see the UK-US relationship or the Five Eyes relationship being affected in any great degree by this move by the EU.
you don't.
Because the Five Eyes is a long-standing agreement that's been there since World War II, and it was very effective in World War II. And so I don't see that changing. It's just too strong a relationship.
So do you think that that's just a question of managing what they're trying
Yeah,
to do in Europe? So, I mean,
yeah.
Bill, could that be a revolving door where it's as much of monitoring Europe? Because obviously the intelligence stuff, it swings both ways, doesn't it? Yeah?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
That's,
everybody spies on everybody's leaders, okay?
well, I mean, you
So,
know, this is not
yeah.
something new. This has been going on for decades. You know, this is not a
Oh,
new
yeah.
concept, but fair enough, the equipment might be newer. So just in terms of how that would, if Europe wanted to go down an avenue of having this single point concept, so there's no longer any national military or national security. So obviously you've got quite a unified system there in America already with the NSA, yeah? Just
Yeah.
how do you, I mean, obviously they want to be building and buying something, you know, a system of their own. How do you think that they would go about that in terms of what you guys have got there in America at the moment currently then?
Well, I think they may have, well, depending on what's been shared. And I don't know the extent of what the sharing has been since I left, but certainly beyond the Five Eyes, the sharing is reduced. In other words, not only in data, but also in terms of technology, so and development. So it's a question of how much of that's been shared as to how far that they could go, or would they have to start on their own to reinvent that process?
Yeah,
You know, it's a question of do we share a technology development that we've succeeded at with them or not?
yeah.
And I don't know the extent of that, but certainly that could be an impediment to them being able to do the kinds of things that the Five Eyes can do.
Well, there are I mean, there's obviously a well-established, it's gone through the step change there at Millennium that you've spoken of, but I mean, obviously there's a hell of an amount of kit and capability there. I'm just sort of just changing the subject here slightly, because obviously we keep seeing this recurring theme of trying to blame Russia for everything.
Yeah.
You know, that Russia are the baddies and Russia are this, and we've now got the same syndrome with China, that China are the baddies all of a sudden. How familiar are you with the bulk data systems that Russia and China use or have? I mean, are you able to talk about that at all?
I'm not, I don't think they have anywhere near the access, for example, that the Five Eyes do, because even back in 2013, they had over 50,000 either direct software implants or hardware and software implants in the network worldwide, and then it includes China and Russia. So, and that was also documented from the Snowden material. So, but the Russians and the Chinese don't have that capacity simply because most of the equipment bought to put together the World Wide Web is U.S. made. So, you know, it's kind of a home team advantage there. You know.
Well, you could say that. Yeah, it just depends on who's controlling it at the. What do you call it? The all-seeing eye or the focal point,
Yeah.
where you've got this view. You've got this
Right.
there's this amazing view on everything. The pyramid.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think people need to understand that Tim Berners-Lee didn't really invent anything. He just, in effect, hacked into something that already existed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
I mean, in effect, it's a military system. Yeah?
A good chunk of it is run by the military, but more and more, I think, is being run by contractors. But it's not just access to the data; they actually operate it, manage it, you know, ensure that it can be queried by NSA analysts or other Five Eyes and other countries. The other countries, the Five Eyes use the IC Reach program to interrogate it. The other countries that are involved, the 9 others that I at least know of, at least 9 that participate in that, use X Keyscore. That's the program they use, which is it has less capacity, less access to data than the Five Eyes. Because the Five Eyes, that IC Reach program includes all the the departments of the U.S. government, like the FBI and the CIA and the DHS and things like that. So, that has a much greater reach into the data that NSA has.
How do you feel about the current sort of Trump campaign then? Do you think that there's going to be more shenanigans as we've seen, or do you think that there'll be some kind of different approach?
No, they have nothing else to do. They have no other option except to try some different shenanigans, try to blame Trump for something. I mean, he's now responsible for COVID-19. I expected them to blame him and the Russians, of course, for the fires in California. But, hey, what can you say? A lot of
Okay.
people in Europe don't really understand that really Trump is the only hope we have here for being able to stop this bulk acquisition and destruction of human rights around the world, and our constitutional rights here in the U.S. as well as your rights there in Europe. I mean, the
Well,
reason I ended up testifying to the House of Lords was because Duncan Campbell came to me and said, the GCHQ and their lawyers told the Parliament in the UK that they couldn't filter out the communications of the Parliament members from all this bulk data because there was just too much of it. Well, that was an outright lie. And I said, and I provided them with all the data on the NARIS device that's currently being used and has been used since 2002 by NSA to do this bulk acquisition. It's documented in court records over here. So, and I gave them all that data. And I said, here, this is how they're doing it. These are the systems and the capabilities of these systems, and that's what they're sucking up and storing in Utah and various other places. And yes, it does give you the capacity to sort out anybody's communication you don't want. You can do that with this material, and it's documented and they've advertised it.
It's very, anecdotally, Bill, from a lot of the Lords, senior officers and backbench MPs and a couple of ministers that I've met in my time lobbying on defence and security issues, a lot of them have said anecdotally, they felt that they were being monitored. So, for you to just sort of put it over in that really sort of succinct context there of, yes, they are, but they don't have to be. You could choose not to be, but you're not.
Yep. Why would GCHQ or NSA not want to monitor people who have power over them?
Yeah.
I mean, you need to know what the people are planning to do to you, budget-wise or operations-wise, or are they going to support you or not in initiatives you're putting forward to get money? You need to know that about people, and that's why they're doing it. Also, to get leverage against them, to use against them in any way they see fit.
Yeah, well, there's the big issue, isn't it? Is that I think that we're seeing a real threat to democracy and how it's functioning. And from my point of view, I see it really failing badly at the moment under the circumstances of this COVID scandal, if you want to call it that. And the same there in America, that there is a real serious threat to how a functioning liberal democracy can operate under these circumstances.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and just think, excuse me, when it comes to this retroactive analysis of data, they're also collecting all the data, all the phone calls and chatter and what have you of all the children in the country using, in both countries, in all the countries really, any children using the electronic devices, their information is being captured too. And now that means you can be retroactively analyzed all the way back to your childhood.
That can't be good. It's very definitely, it's 1984. I mean, it's quite Soviet in effect, isn't it? I mean, it's the sort of thing
on steroids. I mean, I keep quoting Wolfgang Schmidt, the former East German lieutenant colonel in the Stasi. He said of the NSA program, he said, for us, this would have been a dream come true. Yeah. Well, that tells you where we are.
That's where you are. That is exactly where we are. Yeah, I mean, we've just come across a Churchill speech that he made immediately after the war when he was standing for re-election, and he warned about what the policy of the left would ultimately end up in, which was that you would have to have political police to carry on with this policy, and it was short-sighted, and it would rob everyone of their freedoms. And he was very succinct about that. It was an attack on freedom to carry on with socialist, Marxist, communist policy. But he concluded, Bill, with an amazing comment, which was that the civil servants that we have here in Britain would no longer be civil and no longer be servant. And I'm sure you're seeing the same thing in America.
Yeah, the in-place bureaucrats. Yeah.
It's just shocking, isn't it? You know, we've got to this stage where, you know, we're in such a dangerous position, because when you get into the stage when your children are being monitored like that, so this data can be stored, you know, can be stored indefinitely.
Absolutely. My estimate of the storage capacity of the Utah facility was 5 zettabytes. Now that's not quite a yottabyte by any means, but it's a hell of a lot of material.
Yeah, it is.
It's
It's
more than has
ginormous.
been published in the world, from the beginning of time. So, you know, I did that estimate based on the Cisco. A little comment from Cisco gave me that estimate. They said, you know, they supplied the routers to route material to and from that facility. And they said, well, the capacity of all the routers they were buying and putting in place would be on the order of 966 exabytes of data per year could be fed to that starting in 2015. So 966 exabytes, that's about a zettabyte. And the only thing beyond a zettabyte is a yottabyte. And beyond that, there's nothing. There's no definition of it. I thought the next definition, which is where we're going to go when we get quantum computing, should be something like a lot of bytes or a bunch of bytes or something like that, you know?
Well, there's no, I mean, it's just, it becomes into an infinity bubble, doesn't it?
Yeah, just add more servers, more storage, that's all. Hey.
But where, you know, where's the end game of that? It just, you know, there's...
let me tell you, there's some really, really nasty stuff looking to me, as far as I see, on the horizon. It goes like this. You know, they're now working on brain-computer interface.
Yep.
They've got some of it in successful things. They're doing things, and so they can. What it means, though, is it's a two-way street. Okay, if your brain can talk to the computer can talk to your brain.
Yeah, correct.
And people getting chip implants and things like that, so that they can do these kinds of communications with computers and so on. And you start thinking, gee, we are moving right now to the Internet of Things, where your refrigerator is going to be on there, and your toaster, and so on. And the next thing is, with this 5G stuff, is the capacity now to put you on the Internet as a part of the Internet of Things. So now they can access you and your brain through the Internet and implant thoughts and things like that. This is really possible. Now you have to think about that. That means we all become, you know, part of a computer, a central mind. I mean, you can be controlled centrally. I mean, you can implant thoughts to make people do what you want them to do. This is dangerous stuff.
It needs to be stopped, but I don't know how you'd go about stopping that. It needs some severe political force. I don't know whether Mr. Trump is that force in order to do this. But if that isn't arrested, humanity isn't humanity anymore. It's something completely different. Thank you very much indeed. Bill Binney there, former technical director at the NSA, with amazing insight there into what was going on with this bulk data collecting and the programs there and systems at the NSA, and how all that dovetails together with the Five Eyes. So I've got we keep coming back to this Russia theme all the while. Russia being framed, I think that's probably the right way of putting it, framed and pretext into a war situation. You know, and I'm wondering really, do the electorate in the West, are they buying this? Are they accepting it? I don't think so. It doesn't look like it. It looks like this continual approach just isn't really working. So let's look down the other end of the barrel. What do the Russians think about this? Has anybody thought about that? You know, what's their angle on this? And I've got to say, I think in closing, and just trying to sum this up, if there is a conflict with Russia, and that is if, who gets to have their cake and eat it under this situation? Because it can't suit the ordinary people, either in Russia or in the West. Someone's got to come out on top. Thank you very much. Good night. Look forward to seeing you next week.